Welcome, everybody. This is Click to Convert, paid digital amplification. We're here today with, I'm Maria Stewart from our Stewart Winery. We have two really super knowledgeable and esteemed panelists with us today. Trish Berry, live and in person from Australia. Trish has Mastermind Consulting. She has a long career in digital marketing, and cool thing, she was awarded 2020 Women in Wine of Australia Marketer of the Year. So it's been great to get to know Trish. And then a little closer to home, our own Vanessa Haddock, who has Double Tap Marketing, also a rich career in wine marketing spanning California, Australia, and of course the Willamette Valley. So it's really been a pleasure to work with these two women because I've learned so much. I was kind of an early adopter of social media in when we first started this whole game, and one of the things that we keep talking about among the three of us is how much it changes all the time. And so I'm super happy to have the opportunity to learn from these two people, and I know you will be too. Take it away, Trish.
Well, thank you very much, and hello from sunny Sydney. I'm really excited to be able to share some of this information with you today. And as someone who's worked in digital wine marketing for 20 years now, it's a landscape that continues to excite us because it continues to change. And here we are recording this, obviously on the 29th of January, to be able to bring this to you in a time zone that works from here in Australia. But it's such an exciting medium that continues to evolve. So the pace of change is rapid. And I guess for everyone in the room who's listening today, the opportunity for you is to think differently around your strategies around digital and think about how you can make that work for your winery brand. I think what 2020 taught us, and what we want to be able to show you, is that last year was the year where really digital came into its own. And we found here in Australia, working with 14 different wine and food brands that we work exclusively with, it was a year where those brands that had thought about digital in the past really saw the return on their investment. And many of those brands doubled, tripled their sales, grew their engagement, thought about how they connected with their consumers very differently when tasting rooms were closed, restaurants obviously had limitations around them, and their channels to market were limited. So we want to explore today a couple of things to be able to give you some thoughts around what to do for 2021 and how you might be able to use paid amplification in your plans. I think the thing to think about is that the digital ecosystem continues to evolve, and the conversation we had this morning, these platforms continue to change. And even this week, we've seen Clubhouse, a new social media platform, has grown with 1 million new customers being added to the platform from the 1st to the 22nd of January. So, what we're talking about today and what we might be able to screen with you when you actually get to watch this could be a very different landscape. And here in Australia, we're seeing Google and Facebook go head to head with the Australian government. We're seeing, shutdowns and lockdowns, and the digital environment still continuing to change. But what we want you to think about today is how this ecosystem needs to be more than just one piece of the puzzle. So think about it like you're making a cake or making a bottle of wine, that there's many different ingredients go in to make the final piece of the puzzle. And if you're just focusing on one, your results will be limited. So if we look at the next slide, I just thought this might be a good way to be able to start and have a look at just a bit of an analysis from the online revenue and traffic by different mediums from some of our mastermind clients last year. So this information comes from their Google Analytics account. And as you'll see, if you're familiar with Google Analytics, you look at your digital framework by organic search, so people who type into search and find you, your direct search, which is where someone might type in www.wineryname directly, paid search, which is amplification like Google Ads, Google Display, email marketing, social media marketing, referral, and other often is display advertising. So this is the total mediums for these 5 wineries that we've looked at, and it's given you the averages. And what you can see here is that the average of traffic and the averages of your conversions by medium are very different. So while organic search might have the majority of traffic, you can see that email marketing works really hard at driving the revenue for some of these winery brands. And my point to you here is to think about the mix, because it isn't just about one combination. If I pulled out social media from this mix, my email traffic would not work as hard. If I didn't blog around my winery, my organic search would not work as hard. And as you'll see from the next slide, as Vanessa kind of moves through for me, sometimes it's the intersection of these mediums that gives you the best results. So a consumer might find you in organic search, but then they will come back and type in your winery brand directly. Equally, they might find you on social media and then they might continue that journey directly with your brand, and that may be what the conversion looks like. So
And I
it's
want
the total puzzle that you need to be thinking about.
and I wanted to point out too, completely going back to the previous slide, even between now and when this airs, February 18th, these might change dramatically. I think the revenue over indexing on email, that is very true. At the same time, everyone's still stuck at home. So how is that going to look after things open up a bit more and we all are out back in the real world a little bit more? So, what's true now may not be true Feb 18th and very well could change after COVID as well. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to note here in Australia, the COVID cases look very different. I think we've got
Hmm.
something like 10 active cases in the whole country out in the community. So in New South Wales, where I live here in Sydney, we've literally today, it's the first day that we've opened up. We can now travel interstate. And it's actually been really interesting watching this data as, people are not spending online as much as they were through email. Credit cards are coming in from Christmas. That you're really right there, Vanessa, that
Hmm.
data has changed. And that is an average that we've looked at
Hmm.
from the last 12 months. But we've actually seen email revenue in January drop significantly because people are now out and about spending because the pandemic has changed their behavior.
And I think that's a really good warning signal for us too, because um, as someone connected to Australia, my parents, my brother, lots of family friends live in New South Wales as well. Here in America, by comparison, we've never really gotten out of our first wave of COVID. We've had just a 10-month wave of COVID comparatively. So, very interesting to see the insights from your world and to actually look at that as a bit of a leader, because we haven't been there yet to know ourselves, believe it or not.
And it's also, I mean, it's hard for us to remember that there are other things that impact the world beside COVID because it's such a huge one. But also, dry January is a really big
Mhm.
factor. So well, those numbers were from earlier, but
Oh,
that's going to impact everything in January too. At least here it is. I don't know
absolutely.
if it's there, Trish.
We drink in January because it's summer, and February it has an impact here with Feb Fast. So
You're right.
Or
Of
dry
course.
July, right? You have dry July
yeah,
too.
July, July.
So it's all relative, but I think it's good learnings.
So a
All
couple of
right.
things that we want you to take away today. This is an opportunity. Vanessa and I could literally talk to you about this whole session in a whole day's workshop, but there are a couple of key takeaways that we want you to understand. Digital paid advertising is often something that is, looks very daunting, particularly when you're a winery that is wearing many hats and you're trying to be able to make wine and you're trying to run your vineyard, and digital marketing seems to be, just too hard to be able to get your head around. So we want you to understand the role of paid advertising in the digital mix and give you some really good ways to be able to have a look at how you measure those results, because what we love most about this medium is it's clickable, trackable and measurable, and you should be looking at these metrics. Vanessa and I will share a few case studies and conversations around what we're seeing, and then I'll talk you through some brands in Australia who are doing a great job of this, recognizing obviously our market is very different in our consumer laws to go direct to consumer. So there are some nuances around that, but we'll then give you some insights of what we're seeing in the marketplace and why this needs to be an essential part of your marketing program.
And I think onto the last bullet, understanding that digital advertising had already taken over traditional advertising in terms of the return on your investment before COVID existed. Mostly because, or predominantly, not only being a new technology, but also it's pennies on the dollar compared to traditional advertising. So traditional meaning print, billboards, etc. Which again, going back to the earlier point Trish made about measurable results, you never really were or have been able to measure results from those traditional media type things. So not only is digital less expensive than those things, but it's a provable ROI as well. So you get a bit of a double whammy.
Yeah, and I think that the point, we've both worked in brand manager roles and ran winery marketing, and we know that the money is often tight, and I think that points to this next slide, that when you do only have a really small budget to play with, and all of the brands we look after are small wineries, they have limited budgets. Thinking about where they spend their money is really important. So you've got to make sure that that money works really hard for you, and you want to make sure that if you're spending money, that it's in the right channel that's having an impact. But in saying that, I think this point is really critical, that you can very easily chase those shiny toys and think that you need to jump in here. But my number one piece of advice is to not neglect your digital home. And I often talk about social media as about not building a house on someone else's land. Facebook, Google, any of the platforms you cannot control. But you've got to make sure that your house is in order first, and that you build the blueprint around your business, that your digital home is your heartbeat. So your website has to be the center of this digital piece, and then use the broader universe to be able to drive people back to the home. Because we don't know what Facebook and Google or Amazon or those other platforms are going to do. We cannot control that. What we can control is the things that we own, and making sure that you've got your website up to date first is the place that you should be starting.
I might jump in on this one, Trish, if that's okay. So, important thing to think about when you're talking about digital, social, is not just the how to do it, but also thinking about the why you're doing it and the strategy behind doing those things. So, to Trisha's point, omni-channel and making sure you're covering all of your marketing channels is so important for a consistent message. But really being clear about the purpose of what your digital plan, advertising, marketing, etc. is. So, for a long time, let's say 5 to 10 years ago, people finally accepted, yes, my winery, my brand needs to be on social media because that's where everyone's talking. And 5 or 10 years ago, that was enough to be there, just be present. And the world's changed a lot. So today, it's having purpose that's really going to work hardest for you. Everyone can buy followers, everyone can collect likes. That no longer is a metric, anything more than a vanity metric. But understanding what role your social channels are actually going to play for you and being clearly defined, that's super important from the get-go. And as it relates to advertising, we're talking about individual advertising campaigns as well. Not all ads are created equal. And if you go in thinking there's only one potential goal, and that's sales, you're probably going to be really disappointed. So we want to talk about how social media, digital advertising, and organic content, how it fits into a traditional sales and marketing funnel, which we'll have a visual a little bit later about this as well. But take a step back, and instead of thinking my goal is to sell wine, as soon as you said that, you've missed the point. Really, that is absolutely something you can work towards. But if you go from 0 to 60 to try to think you're going to do that, it's not going to work, and you're going to spam your audience. So thinking about more traditional marketing goals and measurable goals when you're doing this type of activity. Are you trying to build your awareness and get your name out there and make sure people even know about you? Are you trying to get new email signups, or trying to convince people to call you or to attend, select going to one of your Facebook events? And that's kind of their call to action, their commitment. Are you trying to entice people to come to your tasting room, or tell them about a specific reason to come to your tasting room on a certain date and get brick and mortar traffic? All of those things are incredibly important in terms of that marketing and sales funnel. it's not a sales channel first. And thinking first and foremost, the phrase social media, it's about being social. And from the beginning of it, back in the day, 15 years ago, it was about connecting people that couldn't physically be together. So if you were at a party and someone showed up and just said, "Hey, I got this widget, want to buy it," out of nowhere, that's what people are experiencing when you go straight to sales on Facebook. Um, and there is an investment that needs to occur for this to be effective. And this isn't just a financial investment. This is a time investment. This is a commitment. This is understanding this is a part of your overarching marketing plan and strategy going forward, not a one and done campaign or a one and done post or do one thing and hope that that is the end all be all instead of a long term play. So again, don't think of investment just with in money, but it's time, commitment, energy, and focus. This next slide is the funnel that I want to just briefly speak about. Many of you are familiar with the sales funnel, the sales and marketing funnel in the traditional sense of the word. The branding, the awareness, the buy. But really like to point this out and think about it from a social media and a digital marketing and an advertising standpoint. From awareness, even knowing who you are, to considering being part of your mailing list or buying a bottle or being in your club or maybe coming for a tasting, to that actual conversion to a purchase, to a sign up, to a subscription, to a visit. And even beyond that, that's not the end. Beyond that, it's understanding what they're saying about you once they have purchased or made that commitment or done that action. Are you listening socially? Are you watching when you're being tagged or what people are saying on social channels? What do they think about you? Not just their smiling face walking out the door. And then mostly or ultimately, are they liking you or disliking you so much that they're recommending you to their friends? They're sharing your posts, or are they telling what a bad experience they had or how negative their experience with their brand is? So I always, when trying to set a goal, trying to set a strategy, I like to think about where in this path my objective and goal is. So I'm making sure that anything I create, anything I target makes sense there. Over to you, Miss Trish.
Fabulous. So we like to think about 3 buckets that you can and can't control. And if you think about the things that we own, so we often talk about digital media in owned, paid, and earned media. So what we would encourage you to do is you obviously can control your website, your email marketing, some of the content that you generate. And that's great to talk to the existing customers that you have. But if you want to grow the sales of your brand and the awareness and your tasting room visitation, you actually have to think about creating advocates and also how you're connecting with strangers. So your earned media, which again could be a whole different strategy, is things like people reviewing you, writing a TripAdvisor review, bloggers, reviewers, wine journalists being able to write you up. So it's where someone else is doing the talking for you to spread the word of mouth. And we'll often in social media do things like snap and share to win and take a photo at our cellar door and share it with your friends to generate earned media about the brand. But what we often see wineries forget about is this paid component because they think social media is free and it's a free platform and I'm on Facebook. And so why should I be able to be paying to be able to deliver? Whereas this is an opportunity to be really smart and talk to strangers and expand the fold to be able to introduce new people to your tribe. And that's where you need to be budgeting and thinking about the role of paid media as part of your digital mix. So when you're writing your marketing plans, we often will say to our clients, think about what is your own strategy, the earned strategy, and then how are we reaching strangers to be able to tell our story to a broader audience.
I think one beauty about digital when it comes to paid as well is that instead of more traditional advertising, again, like the billboards, where it was put it in the highest traffic area where you're going to see the most eyeballs, and theoretically, of those 500,000 eyeballs, hopefully percentage is interested in what you have to offer. The funnel or the funnel is opposite. So because social is trackable, measurable, traceable, because we can target certain audiences, we can put our products and we can put what we have in front of people who already want what we have. So that's part of why it's so much more effective, is because you're only showing it to those people most likely to want to engage. So I just wanted to point that out.
And Vanessa, you're going to talk about, or somebody's going to talk about how we narrow that down to the right eyeballs.
We're going to show some examples of the kinds of targeting that you can do, the types of attributes, the types of, your own email list, how you can upload that to Facebook and create an audience that you deliver an ad to. So we are going to talk about some of those types. We're going to try not to go too far down into the detail rabbit hole of all those things, because again, Trish and I could spend an hour just talking about that. But yes, we are going to highlight some of that.
Great.
So just quickly, I just wanted to talk about your blog. And I know that your blog, your newsletter, we're back to the website before we get into paid. But this is really important in terms of your digital marketing mix. And it's often something that brands don't think about. But these are two examples from two of our winery clients here in Australia, Redmond Wines in Coonawarra and Home Oak Vineyards in Tasmania. And we've been blogging and, developing really great content for these brands for probably 3 or 4 years. And when I showed you that slide earlier around the organic traffic and how much traffic is coming to their site for free through the organic search, this is where this traffic has come from. So if you can see here to the left that nearly 40% on average of their brand traffic came from organic search. We're driving organic search because of fabulous content that sits on the site. And just a couple of examples with those two blogs, Redmond literally has a piece of content on their website that is answering the question, how long does a red wine last once it's opened? And that one piece of blog content that is 3 years old and continues to be optimized drives more traffic to their winery website. They receive more views on that site than they do their homepage. Equally, they have a piece of content on their site saying, what is the difference between Cabernet and, in Australia, we call it Shiraz, Syrah, and that gets more traffic than any other piece of sales content. The same applies for Home Oak, and Home Oak hate this because they are a Pinot Noir producer, exceptional Pinot Noir like you have in Oregon, and they get more traffic to their website from one piece of content that is what is Moscato wine, and they have one Moscato wine that sells significantly below the rest of their product range, but the site traffic is coming from these really well-refined pieces of content. So don't dismiss the role of this in how the marketing mix can come together, because this is giving them free traffic and free eyeballs that are really relevant. And I just think that that's important to think about before we start talking about paid, because I would rather you work hard on this and then let's start spending the money.
And I'm going to put Maria on the spot real quick, pop quiz. Can you make a guess, and no wrong answers, can you make a guess why those example blogs, the difference between Shiraz and Cab, the other ones that Trish mentioned, can you make a guess as to why those are the most popular on their site? Or
universal questions, right? People are sitting around, opened a bottle of wine, talking to their friends, presumably if you can have your friends over. What the heck is this wine? Who knows about it? I mean, I think that people have endless questions about wine, and Google is our librarian. I think it's brilliant, and I think this is a real gem of information, because there kind of has been a trend toward abandoning blogs. Nobody reads blogs anymore. I don't think that's true. I think they do.
Mm-hmm. So, well, and I think you're totally right. You're totally right. That was exactly my hunch, and I want Trish to tell us how wrong or right we are after I say my statement, because what this example is SEO in action, search engine optimization in action. So by writing a title or content that is like somebody would be Google searching, it's being Google searched, and thus the content's coming up first in search results. So that's something I like to think about. You don't have to be an search engine optimization SEO whiz to understand that. If you're just thinking like a consumer and what would they be searching, to get them to your site.
Right.
Correct. So a bit of a segue before we talk into the
Yes.
paid media side. So let's
Yes.
talk about paid, because obviously that's what we're here to talk to you about. And we often get this question about, well, why would we pay? Because social media is free. And we've only got tiny budgets as a winery, and we all want to put in new tanks or buy a new harvester or, do some amazing things in the vineyard. But what's exciting about this is the cost effectiveness of this platform. So let's explain to you some of the reasons, and we're going to focus, if you move to the next slide, Vanessa, of the ways that I like to think about this. So we talked about the importance of driving people home, and the way that we talk about this from a winery point of view here in Australia is your physical home is your tasting room, your venue, your cellar door. Your physical home is your website. So we're talking about here is these are ways to be able to use paid advertising to drive people back to your home base, so that the strangers will start to discover and fall in love with your brand. So if you think about it at that basic level as the why, this is why you need to be involved.
And Trish, let me just a quick comment and a correction. I think you said physical twice. So your tasting room is your physical home. Your website is your digital home. Correct? Okay, cool.
Correct.
Awesome.
Correct.
Sorry to interrupt.
So the next slide kind of gives you a reason what platforms then we need to be starting to think about. And we often will, hear people say, well, we're on social, and why do we need to be giving Facebook or Google some more money? But the challenge that we find with organic traffic on our social media is it only has so much reach. So we could, have an amazing piece of content, but the average engagement rate for Facebook organic posts, according to HubSpot, is not even 1%. Now, we're not saying organic reach is dead for wineries, because we can see great content that is obviously being shared. A lot of this comes down to the size of your brand, the level of engagement that you have with the tribe, and the type of content that you're publishing. So there's still ways that you can get your great organic content out in front of your audiences, but paid gets it to a different audience who might be more strategic.
And to that point too, I want to, we don't want to call out names of examples of brands or wineries that I'm about to speak to, but our audience can use their imagination. The next time someone mentions X brand has how many thousands of followers, my recommendation is to first go to their social page and look at their organic content and care less about how many followers and look more about, when they do an organic post, how many people like it. There are plenty of brands, there are plenty of big companies that have 500,000 followers, but an organic post has 5 likes. That's an incredibly low engagement rate, and it goes to show their size, their followership is probably purchased, and that they're probably spending all of their money on advertising, not on time to create organic content.
I think this is a good point to just reiterate, a good time to just reiterate, because we're talking about the digital home and the social media. I think that it's a great way, always has been and always will be, to think about this as social media is for building your community, whether you're paying for it or not. And then you invite them to your home, which is your website, once you have created a relationship with these people. And I think that Vanessa's point is perfect. If a organic post only has 5 likes, maybe you need to work a little bit more on your community and engaging with those people than worrying about the big numbers, the glamour shot, so to speak.
That's a really good point, Maria. I like how you summed that up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to focus on today is the big platforms, obviously Facebook and Google. And I just want to make the point, though, that there are plenty of platforms and there's lots of solutions here we can think about. And it comes down to an individual brand strategy. So some of our brands are playing harder in YouTube. Some are still playing on Twitter and spending money on Twitter. Some are, now dabbling in Clubhouse. The paid media landscape really gets driven by your individual brand strategy and who your customer is. We're going to make some generalizations around the next couple of slides and focus on Facebook in particular. And the reason for that is that when we have a look at where the digital marketing spend across America and across Australia globally, actually, 2/3 of digital advertising is captured through Google, Facebook, and Amazon. Remembering Google owns YouTube, remembering that Facebook also owns WhatsApp, Messenger, Instagram. So we're honing in here on the big platforms because often it makes sense for a winery. The other thing to think about is that different platforms have different objectives. So this week, Social Bakers had delivered a great report on what they've seen in the US market and paid spend in 2020. And they made the point that the engagement per brand on Instagram is much higher than it is on Facebook. But equally, if you're trying to generate traffic back to your website, Facebook absolutely kills the traffic of Instagram. So again, if you've only got a tiny amount of money, and we often find wineries will come to us and say, we want to engage with the millennial market and I want to be on TikTok and I think I need a TikTok strategy, or Pinterest is great, or we should be doing more reels on Instagram. And my feedback to them will often be, if you've only got $500 to spend in your advertising this month, you need to spend it where it's going to drive that traffic back to your website. And Facebook will generally be that platform that will work for website traffic. So that is a massive generalization, but the reason we focus so much on Facebook is that it works really hard of driving traffic back to your website and getting the clicks. Absolutely, if engagement is your strategy, that is where Instagram can happen. But often we're trying to drive people home with a really limited budget, and that's why we're focusing really strongly on Facebook, Google, as the primary mediums to talk about here.
And to piggyback on that, part of why Facebook organically is such a good website driver is because in a caption of an organic post, you've always been able to put a clickable URL. So when someone sees your post, they can touch it and go to your site. Instagram has very intentionally and very unwaveringly always prevented that from happening in your organic photo post captions. Again, that's very intentional because they don't want you to leave the ecosystem of Instagram. They want you to stay put. Again, Facebook owns Instagram now, so there's a lot of things to think about and complications. But to Trish's point, website traffic, Facebook, Instagram, not only for community, but I'd also venture to say organic brand awareness as well, because people are there to see things. They want pretty pictures. They want more lighthearted content, and that's what they expect when they go there. So for the wine industry, it's a great place to show beautiful, eye-stopping imagery and really help understand that kind of awareness lever you can pull with Instagram still.
So we might just skip over this. This is obviously, just talking to the point, and this is using, I guess, why we're talking about Facebook. Obviously, different targeting options. Facebook absolutely still king, particularly in the wine industry, but not saying that there aren't other platforms. And just using a real life example to give you a bit of an understanding, just looking at the next slide. Now, this is a real life client, and this is information from their December content plan. Now, remember, in December, the platform of Facebook is incredibly cluttered. Every category, every brand is trying to reach their customer. We find here in Australia that our Australia Post deliveries, shipment to the customer, often can't be done until, we cut those off early in December, which means most of December, the environment is super cluttered with fashion brands, e-commerce brands, a whole landscape of people trying to reach their customer base. But what you can see here up on screen is 2 posts, and I think this is important to think about how the paid comes into play. So you can see on the left the insights, and you can see the light colors of organic traffic, and you can see the orange that is a little bit darker where we've amplified strategic posts. And that's where we put money behind things for a reason. Now, there's 2 ways you can do that. The first post here is lovely Nicole, who is the cellar door manager at Best's at Great Western. And this was an organic piece that was put up in the middle of December, so key period that had organic reach of 2,500 people. Now, their Facebook page only has 10,000 fans. So to receive this sort of organic traffic for free in the middle of December still shows that great content works. It's a person, they relate to her. You can see that there's 17 comments and 8 shares on that post. So there's two things I can do with it. I can either amplify it to get out there to a greater group further, or I can hold that post until January and I can start to amplify that in January when the traffic is lower. Equally, if I look at the picture on the right and I can start to see a message that was really important to get out there. So their tasting room had just opened before Christmas. The hours had changed because in Victoria here in Australia, the pandemic COVID rules had lifted again and they could, invite more people to come and visit them. That piece of content only reached 1,200 people, 2 comments and 1 share. So I was not going to achieve my objective of getting people to come and visit me unless I got that content out to a broader group. And that's where paid comes into the strategy. So you can see 2 different ways of looking at that content. One that's a really great piece of content, organic, that could go further if I got it to another group of people. Or equally, a piece of content that I needed people to see that wasn't going to get the traction organically that I needed to put money behind.
And Trish, I have a lifetime question for you. Historically, pre-COVID and still to a certain extent, in America, posts with pictures that had more than 20% of the image covered with words, Facebook wouldn't even allow you to pay to boost or do ads with them because it's taking up more than 20% of the real estate. I've seen that lax a bit in 2020, like they're not rejecting it every single time, just sometimes. Do you have that same restriction in Australia still or not?
Yeah, it obviously has been lifted, but the posts obviously that don't have as much ad copy obviously don't, generally perform. Interestingly, this is a regional tourism piece. So we were given this piece of content by the regional tourism authority. Nicole would never volunteer herself to go in front of a camera, but it's working really well. And I guess that's sometimes where you need to have what we call a fluid budget, where something's working. Don't just go, oh, that worked. Like, get it out to a further group of people because you've got that learning. So we often say to our brands, don't just say, oh, well, I was only spending $500 this month. If something is working, keep the momentum going.
Yeah.
So now we're just going to talk a bit quickly, and I'm conscious of time that we're going to need to keep moving. So this is the number 1 tip for you. Do not hit that boost button. Do not hit that boost button.
Don't do it.
We're going to show you now why Facebook Business Manager becomes your best friend and why this offers you so much more opportunity to strategically target. So let's just give you some insights. And again, we could do a whole hour on what Facebook Business Manager is. But if you have a look at some of these options, this is how you would often run your Facebook ads. So again, defining your objectives, understanding what you're trying to do, and then strategically putting money behind that post to reach the right group of people.
And can I just point out, because it's kind of hard to see on my screen, that the marketing objectives in the box on the bottom right-hand corner, when you're creating an ad within Business Manager, Ads Manager platform, it helps guide you through what your goals are. So the ones listed here are brand awareness and reach. You're just trying to get your brand out there. There's, goals of engagement, watching video, signing up for your email list, and then actual conversions to purchase, to sales, to physical store visits, etc. So I just wanted to highlight that in case it's not viewable on the screen for our audience.
Great. So boosting your post just gives money to Facebook to get it out to the universe. So that's, if you think of why you're boosting it, that's where the money goes. This is also money to Facebook, but it's strategically targeted. And this is why, for wineries that have got a tiny amount of money, spending their money thinking about how to get that eyeball really targeted is important. This data I pulled together last night. So it is obviously, super relevant. And this is looking at people who are currently in Oregon, who are 25 plus, who have an interest in food, drink, and beverages. And as you can see, this comes from the audience insights on Facebook. There are 600 to 700,000 people in the area that meet that criteria. I also can get an understanding of what age groups and what demographics. So if you say my wine brand targets 55 plus because they're drinking exceptional Pinot, I can then, start to be more targeted with my spend of who I'm talking to. So this gives you a little bit of an insight on the opportunity. And if I drill further on the next slide, I can dig deeper to be able to reach the right people. So again, I might have said, okay, that audience was a little bit young. I'm going to go 30 plus, and I'm going to take out a wine interest because that's particularly broad. And I'm only going to target consumers who love Pinot Noir, because who doesn't love Pinot Noir, right? And you can see that this demographic starts to change. So I get an older audience who are highly engaged, with women often being over-indexing on their Facebook spend. To the right, you will see their activity on Facebook. So not all of these people are commenting on posts or sharing the post, but what we can see from their behavior is that they are clicking on ads. So we can start to understand a little bit more information about brands that they like, affiliate brands, what they're looking at, what other pages they can target, and be really clever in the way that we're talking to that consumer with a very limited spend. Going even deeper gives us more opportunities. And we love this from a tourism marketing point of view perspective, because we often want to attract people who are in the area. So we've just ran these ads in Australia with people who are traveling in the key wine regions of Australia. And we physically put the pin, so you can see over here on the left, we find our winery and we physically put a pin over that location. And then we might potentially target people who live in the area or people who are traveling in the area. And Facebook knows so much information about us as consumers as we check in and we share on our mobile data. You can see, and apologies if I call it, is Willamette.
It's Willamette, damn it. It's Willamette, damn it.
So people who are in that area, age 25 plus, there are over 200,000 people currently in your area as of last night that you could target with those ads. That gives you a much better return on your investment if you're trying to target people in for an event, a specific tasting, or information that they might want to receive.
I also want to piggyback onto this, that some people in the audience might be thinking, oh my God, we have hundreds of wineries in a 40-mile radius. Aren't we all competing against each other? And especially because we're extremely collaborative of a region. And what I'd like to challenge our audience with is, if what you're saying could be said by every other winery in the Willamette Valley, then that's a challenge to you to understand how you are differentiated from everybody else, or how what you're offering is differentiated. That's a pure marketing challenge to you. It really makes you stop and think about how you are different than all of our other wonderful Willamette Valley winery friends.
So hopefully that gives you a bit of excitement of just how amazing some of this potential is. And if you often go, oh, where do I even start here? Often your email list is the first place that you would start. So without wanting to sound too technical, you can actually set up some metrics in the back end of Facebook Business Manager where you can upload your email list in a CSV file into the back end of Facebook Business Manager, and it will give you a match of customers on that database. So let's say you've got 10,000 names on your existing email database or your tasting room database. You can upload that information and Facebook will tell you, of that 10,000 names, maybe 6,000 of those people are on Facebook. And then you won't know which of those 6,000 people, but you can start to target ads at that group of customers. So what we'll often do is we will send out an email first, and we will send that to the database, and then we will use the paid advertising to retarget those people on the list as a reminder to buy. Often what they'll do is they'll go back to their email to make the purchase. But you think about it, your inbox, if it's anything like mine, has got 200 emails a day. It's often when I get home and I'm scrolling through Facebook watching television that I see that prompt to buy, that I go back to my email to make the purchase.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? It does mean that you need to make sure that you've got the right privacy policies on your website to comply with this. But again, it's a massive opportunity when you've got a small budget. And equally, what you can do is generate what's called a lookalike audience. So again, you can use that traffic either coming from your website, coming from your email database, or specific customer groups. And you can say to Facebook, I want you to find the customers that look and behave exactly like this club type or this type of audience. And that's where the power of some of this targeted marketing comes in. So
Sorry.
Go for it, Vanessa. Do you want to cover the pixels? And
I want to cover this because I can imagine at this point in the presentation, there are probably people in the audience saying, okay, I didn't know I could do that. That's amazing. But how do I do that? Where do I start? And that cycle of being overwhelmed and not knowing how to starts. And besides, identifying if there are people or teams or agencies or whatever, or someone in-house is interested, besides going that path and trying to understand what your options are to find someone who is an expert and can help you figure that out. I think this is a huge takeaway, this slide right now, is that if you figure nothing else out as your first port of action or call to action from this, is just figure out how to generate your Facebook pixel, embed it on your website so it can start tracking the traffic that comes to your website from Facebook. And the reason I say if you do nothing else, but if you prioritize this, that make this happen while you learn how to do the rest of what we're talking about yourself, or identify who can do it for you. Because by putting on your website, it'll start tracking that incredibly valuable information so that by the time you do have someone or you have learned how to do all these crazy things, you have some rich data to go off of. I say that because I want people to pay attention as I explain what a pixel is. It's basically something that you create in your business manager after you've created your Facebook ad account, and it generates a unique snippet of code that you either work with your web developer and have them put it on the head of their website. They will understand what you mean. Or if you manage your website via something like WordPress or Squarespace, potentially even WineDirect, understanding where on that platform you add your pixel by searching help, by seeing if there's a widget, whatever your method is of website, that code being entered and confirmed as active will start tracking your website traffic immediately as a result of any of your Facebook advertising. Trish, you want to add anything to that?
nope.
It's so valuable.
So to give you a bit of a visual of how this might work, just to try and break it down a little bit, let's just say we're running ads and we're looking for ads that might be happening. Getting them to that website and making sure that that pixel is installed often is a great way for us of getting names onto a database. So we often spend a lot of money, well, not a lot of money, but we often spend a lot of time trying to get that email acquisition. So if you think about this and you've got the pixel and they've come and explored you from a blog, or they're reading a specific piece of content on your website, what Facebook advertising allows you to do is to retarget them often with an offer. So we'll often say, come and now join our wine club and receive this bonus bottle, or sign up to our newsletter and we'll give you $25 off your first purchase. That customer already is in their funnel. So they've already understood you, they've visited you, they might have spent 4 or 5 minutes on your site, but they're not ready to buy. And we know that email is where, for us, 45% of the conversion happens. So again, you're using paid social to be able to get that customer data onto a system that you can control.
Just a time check, we have about 10 minutes left in the recording, so I'm going to make the executive decision to jump forward a few slides, and I will speak to this one. I'm sure by this point, people are starting to think, okay, that's great. You say it's cheap, you say it's effective. What are we talking? This return on investment is pretty much my mental traditional go-to and has been for about 5 years since I've lived in Oregon. And this is pre-COVID, but I want to talk during COVID. So typically, I've always budgeted about $1.50 to $2 per click. So meaning anytime I have an ad out there, the cost to me when someone clicks that ad, I don't want it to exceed $2. And the targeting and the refining of your audience that we talked about before is one way to try to get to that end result of the actual spend. Another way to think about this is once you have launched an ad and you might have it running for a week, 2 weeks, a month, is that if in that first week and you're looking at some of the initial data and it's far exceeded that budget, that's a good signal to you that you need to look at some of the other ad attributes and try to better understand what might be too broad, not specific enough, etc. So that's one thing I want to call out. The second thing is when it comes to wine, think about what you're asking them to do and keeping that in mind relatively when you're talking about your budget. If you are asking them just to click to a page on your website, you'd expect to spend less than $1.50, or $1.50 is the max you'd want to spend. If your call to action is to buy a $400 case of wine, naturally and obviously you have to assume that your cost per click is going to be greater. Them clicking it doesn't mean they're going to buy it, but for them to even be interested in pursuing thinking about that $400 purchase is going to cost you more. So I just want to say this average is across all types of ads. Keep what you're asking in mind. From an actual monthly budgetary standpoint, I really like to try to encourage my clients and my own budget in the past to estimate $500 to $1,000 per month that you are committing to digital advertising. And I do want to point out, I personally, for years, have taken the stance that I am spending all of my advertising on digital. So instead of thinking, oh, that's an extra $500 a month I may not have, think about what you're currently spending on traditional advertising and think about what you can take from that to make a $500 per month budget. We're talking $6,000 a year. That's a 1/20th of a page in some large wine publications, tiny little ad. So think relatively about what this is, especially if you know it's going to work harder for you. And then, of course, keep in mind any specific time periods and the really competitive times. To Trisha's point, around Christmas when everyone's trying to sell, when you're advertising a month before Easter or 4th of July, all those times where people are selling things are all trying to think of how to sell more because people are buying more. Budget appropriately. Go up and down on what your monthly budget is on those key times because it's going to be a competitive time. And then also on ROI, we also want to talk about the return on advertising spend of your ROAS. These are my thoughts specifically, so I'd love to hear Trisha's perspective, but another measurement of success in any ad or that it's going well midstream is I want the result to at least be 3 times the cost of what I put into it. So if I've set my budget of $1.50 per click, or I've set my total spend of $250 and I'm trying to get a sale, well, I want to make at least 3 times that much in sales or in my dollar assigned measurable success metric to at least be 3 times what my input was. I've seen more, but at least 3. Trish, what's your perspective there?
Yeah, look, I think, we're often really hesitant to put a sales ROI on some of this social spend because we keep saying if you put a sales ROI on it, you're assuming that it's all about sales. And that's not the metric that social is there for. Social for us is there about driving that, engagement rate, the shares, some of the fluffier, you might call it, metrics. But it comes back down to that chart that we showed you in the beginning around that total marketing mix and making sure that bigger picture is obviously growing because we see that's where social has the role. Don't put a sales metric on it if it's not a sales channel.
Mm-hmm. And if you're thinking about other measurements like engagement or awareness or traffic, try to equate the cost in a way that makes sense. Think about your time investment versus the benefit you're getting. Are you at least tripling your time cost to kind of that goal or that metric? So that's to Trish's point, very generalized, but just a rough kind of metric for measurement. And what we also want to talk about is what you cannot put a price on when it comes to cost or comes to investment. And it's all these things that we've been talking about with digital, that you get actual data and results. You get to complete control of your advertising. You can stop, start, change as you go. Your risk is low. You are only charged when someone clicks it. You're only charged when someone does the action you ask them for. Instead of your $200,000 billboard down Highway 99, you are saying, I have $20, these are the people, and that's the most you're ever going to spend, and you're only going to spend it when they do what you want them to do. So high risk, low cost, or low risk, low cost, high reward. And then, of course, you have complete control over your own advertising. So even though the tools like Facebook, Instagram, and Google can be really complicated, your investment of time or your investment in the upfront cost to have someone on your team do it, or the investment to hire it out, is upfront, and it's going to throw things out of whack from a first month measurement, but long term, that investment is going to pay for itself in droves.
And I think we've talked here about Facebook, but if you're just kind of keeping it moving, Ness, you know, when we talk about the fact that this is measurable, Google Analytics has some amazing tools to let you see what that return on investment looks like. So go in there and look at that data, because as you'll see here, you know, when you're looking at the traffic that come from different sources, it will help to give you some guidance on what is working best for your brand. Now, we've spoken a lot about Facebook, but the same kind of applies if we look at, you know, how this works on Google or Instagram. Obviously, different platforms have different ways to reach the consumers. So if you flick to the next one, Ness, you know, if we're thinking about how this looks, you know, from different platforms, Google also has an opportunity, and there's also some opportunities for paid amplification around Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. You know, different platforms obviously have the same measurables and the same way that you can account. We just use that Facebook example because it's obviously 90% of where the traffic will come from.
So I have a question here, if you don't mind if I jump in. I know we're running short on time, and I think this is different in Australia than in the US. I'm not positive about that, but I have had ads rejected from Facebook because they're too obviously trying to sell alcohol. So can you guys speak to that a little bit in terms of what the threshold is, what you can ask or suggest, or how much of a picture of wine you can show your customers? I mean, because obviously what we're trying to do is sell alcohol. That's no big secret. But how do I get past, what's the workaround?
Pre-COVID or after COVID? Because I have multiple answers to that. Let's say there's a million things, and I'll be brief because Trish, I'd love your perspective because the rules are different in Australia than they are here. But first and foremost, there are sometimes things that Facebook will reject your ad for, and it won't necessarily give you a really, really clear reason as to why. So you're, being rejected for alcohol could mean maybe you don't have the setting on your Facebook page that says this is an alcohol related page or an alcohol related ad. Or maybe when you're creating an ad, you didn't notice the age range was set automatically from 18 to 65. So even if your Facebook page is an alcohol linked page, then if your ad, another layer, conflicts it or says 18 to 65, then it's going to reject it. But it might not say that. It might not say, we are rejecting your ad because. I think another thing, and it's different pre-COVID than last COVID, I think to the symposium panel I was on last year, which was all about legal compliance and marketing in the wine industry, and as not only traditional but digital. And so Facebook is trying to get more hip with it about those things. So actively showing someone sipping a wine, technically not legal in the US. So maybe Facebook's catching on to it. During the time of COVID, they've had such an influx of people finally doing advertising that there sometimes are rejections for no reason. They're trying to keep up with everything as much as we're trying to keep up with everything as business owners and marketers too. So the short answer is there's a lot of reasons why. Trish?
Look, we can sell direct to consumer, but the conversion rates are often low. So we are saying, like, it's just random. Facebook, sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. And I guess the skill then comes into playing around in the back end to be able to often have an ad rejected that you can get up and running, that will often change the age gate. And in Australia, we can buy from over 18. So sometimes it can be legally set at 18 and you've got age gates, and for unknown reasons it rejects. So sometimes we'll go and change the ad to 40 plus and it might be, fine to be able to run. It's really a bit of a tricky system, and often that's why we would say it's not about sales here, because the sales piece is so hard to comply with. You better to use email for that sales conversion where you can control that, but use social advertising to get them back to home.
Right.
Another new technology on Facebook as of September 2020 is their catalog feature. They really went 0 to 60 on that. And so that's where businesses can create online catalogs of their products. Well, at this point, in theory, wine is not supposed to be able, or alcohol in general, you can't have products in catalog. But I've seen that contradicted too. I've been able to upload wines to catalogs for some Facebook pages that weren't rejected where they were on others. So there is still a human element to Facebook approval too. So if you see it on someone else's page and it's working and you can't, don't immediately think that they did something different than what you did to be able to have it. Like, they could have gotten lucky.
I would make the point, though, that we often say to our clients is Facebook is impossible to get a hold of unless you're spending $50,000 a month to have an account manager. We would often say they can also shut down your page for no reason, and we have seen that happen. So my advice is be cautious and be really careful about what you do, because if they do decide to shut your page down, the chances of actually complaining and getting it back up can often be pretty slim. So be aware of that there's no help desk that they're going to pick up a call and be sympathetic to your cause. So we're always pretty conservative in that approach.
Okay, all good to know. But it sounds like it's a little bit of trial and error, walking a fine line of not stepping too far over the bounds.
There's trial and error, as well as this isn't stuff that you can learn overnight too. So I think people like Trish, myself, other digital marketers, we've kind of grown up with Facebook advertising. In fact, Trish almost 10 years ago is the first person that showed me even the most simplistic things that you could do in Facebook, which looked like peanuts compared to what you can do today. Right. But because we're in it all the time and we're seeing the daily tiny little changes, we know we can guess maybe at a greater success rate why, or how to fix, or if it's them not you kind of thing too.
Right. Well, I think it's time for us to think about wrapping up, because we're over our time. So
I did have 2 case studies that are there that I'm happy to share and put up, and I might even write them as case studies and put them up on the Mastermind website. So in the next 2 weeks before you guys actually view this, go over to the website. We will write them up as case studies instead of talking them through to you today. So, head on over and we'll make sure that we cover that before we talk about these top tips.
And to that point too, Trish and Maria and I are very adamant. We will share this full presentation with everyone who attends, because there are things we didn't get to cover today, but also it's a lot of information. There are some tools that we suggest you look into. So you will have this as a reference tool as well. So top 5 tips. Want to take it away, Trish?
Sure. I think this is the biggest one that I see, people not putting enough time and budget to refine and optimize. So let's just say that you have $1,000 and you think that's your total budget. Often that doesn't give us as marketers often enough time to understand what is working and then to make that money work harder for you. So make sure that you give this a little bit of time, because we see it's that time that gives us the learnings to continue to enhance, refine, and optimize the results. And often you'll find that brands might just show a little bit of money and then they stop the spend when we've got the learnings to continue. So I'm not saying to you change your advertising budget to $1 million a year, but rather than budgeting $1,000, maybe budget $1,500 for a campaign, so that you can use a half of that budget to understand, and then the other half of that money to really amplify your learnings. So that would be my number 1 tip.
That's good advice.
Number two, Ness?
Yeah, so omni-channel digital plan, I think take what we were saying 10 years ago about traditional omni-channel marketing and making sure no matter where someone first interacts with your brand, whether it's the tasting room, whether it's on shelf in a grocery store, whether it's the website, whether it's the Facebook, make sure no matter which door of the building they're coming into your home from, that it all fits together and it all makes sense. And not only from a consistency standpoint, but from making sure you're not putting all your eggs in one basket or the other in the digital standpoint. I don't think that means you have to be on any and every platform, because if you do, you'll drive yourself crazy because there's a new one every minute. But make sure you're thinking about it as that full picture, consistent web of digital marketing rather than individual tools and products.
Yeah, number three, I would say, is test and trial. These platforms are globally listed companies and they need to make revenue, but they're also innovating with their products on a regular basis. So keep abreast of the changes and be prepared to try things. So, for example, stories on Instagram at the moment are a massive trend. You know, being able to put a little bit of money behind it might be something that is super measurable in Google Analytics and might just work for your brand. So don't be scared about testing things, measuring the results, and trying something different, because that's how you get your brand story out to a different audience.
Mm-hmm. And
Number
great
four
segue.
is analyze. Like, Google Analytics should be your best friend. The amount of information in Google Analytics is ridiculous about driving decision making for your business. This is where you need to be able to understand the return on your investment on your digital home. So go in there. We've got a whole heap of tools that we will share in this presentation, different platforms that you can measure the results around. Some are paid, some of them are more free to use, but there's some great information that you can use to analyze those results and use the data to use decision making for your brand.
And Google Analytics, by the way, is free for anyone who doesn't know that, which makes it even crazier how effective and powerful it is. I think the last takeaway, and this is coming from an unbiased perspective, is to think really long and hard about who on your team, who, if it's you, who you want to work with, who either knows how to do this or so eager to learn how to do this, or understands strategy but doesn't know this, or knows how to do this but doesn't understand strategy. Really take time to think about who would be the right fit for this type of purpose. I think a lot of times as business owners, as small business owners, we're conditioned to think, got to do it myself, got to do it cheap, got to figure it out myself, got to DIY. And I think sometimes we overload ourselves with these self expectations that prevent us from utilizing these tools that are at our fingertips. Because remember, at the end of the day, the cost of lost opportunity of not prioritizing this space could cost you more than you may ever know. Digital is no longer if you have time. Digital is no longer a nice to have. Digital should be leading the horse with your marketing efforts, not only because of COVID, but before COVID just highlighted and proved it for us. And this is going to change purchase behaviors forever, even when we can get back to more of a more normal life. So be really intentional, be really strategic, and be really smart about the importance of this to your business.
I think that's so important. I think so often people just say, oh, I'll get around to that. But it's really social at all levels is a really important part of our marketing strategy now. It's no longer an accessory. Hasn't been for a while, but yeah.
It hasn't. And people like Trish and I have been banging that drum for probably at least 10 years. So,
right.
You know.
Keep it up, ladies. Keep it
20. up. No, so 2020 for us was kind of like, told you so, but
right.
That's a different story.
Well, the good news is that COVID kind of forced the consumer to come to us digitally in a way. We were sitting here ready and waiting with our beautiful websites and our cool shopping carts, and finally the consumer is ready to engage with us on that level. So that's kind of rewarding.
Absolutely.
If we can look at the silver linings.
Absolutely. And silver linings are important, and having taken the time and the effort to do it before 2020 is why you're being rewarded now, because you did that due diligence. So I don't want people to feel helpless if they haven't started this journey yet, or if they only joined the game in 2020 from a business standpoint. yeah, we're all going through this
No
together.
time like the present. No time like the present.
Yeah.
Well, Trish and Vanessa, thank you. I think, the slide here has the contact info for both of these incredibly smart women. And obviously in your other Oregon Wine Symposium info, this will be repeated. So I just can't thank you enough. I learned a ton, and I'm sure everybody else will say the same thing. And of course, that begs all the other questions that I want to ask. So we'll get to that.